1970s, America felt a certain weariness, you know. It was a nation grappling with a sense of unease. The economy was a source of constant worry. Inflation was high, meaning money bought less each day. Growth had slowed to a crawl. This combination, known unpleasantly as stagflation, created a climate of uncertainty. People worried about their jobs, their savings, their futures. Abroad, the world felt a very dangerous and tense place indeed. The long shadow of the Cold War still stretched across continents. A feeling of American vulnerability had taken hold. It was a country that seemed to have lost a little of its swagger, its confident step. Into this atmosphere of doubt stepped Ronald Reagan. He promised a great national comeback. His words were not complicated or academic. He spoke of restoring American faith, American pride, American strength. He believed the country's best days were not in its past, but waiting to be built anew. He told Americans that they were not the problem. Government was the problem. This was a bold and direct message. It resonated with millions who felt burdened by economic hardship and a perceived decline in national spirit. Reagan's appeal lay in his ability to paint a picture of a brighter future. He spoke of a shining city on a hill, an image of America as a beacon of freedom and opportunity for the world. This was not a new idea, but he delivered it with a conviction that made it feel fresh and urgent. His promise was twofold. At the heart of President Reagan's domestic agenda was a bold economic plan. It soon became known by a single memorable name, Reaganomics. This was not a subtle or timid adjustment. It was a fundamental change in direction for the American economy. The plan rested on a theory called supply-side economics. The core idea was quite straightforward. If you cut taxes on businesses and individuals, they would have more money. Businesses would use their savings to invest, expand, and create new jobs. Individuals would spend and save more, fueling economic activity. The goal was to stimulate the supply side of the economy, believing that prosperity would then follow. The plan was enacted through a series of major policy changes. The first and most significant was the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. This law introduced sweeping tax cuts across the board, with the top marginal tax rate falling dramatically over his tenure. The second key element was deregulation. Reagan's administration worked to reduce the number of government rules that affected industries, banking, transportation, energy. The thinking was that these regulations stifled innovation, added unnecessary costs, and slowed down business growth. By removing them, he hoped to set the free market loose, allowing it to work more efficiently and create wealth. These policies were designed not just to fix the economy, but also to lift the national mood. Reagan believed that a dynamic, growing economy was essential for American optimism. He argued that when people see opportunities to succeed, to build something for themselves and their families, their entire outlook changes. The aim was to create a virtuous cycle. Economic growth would lead to renewed confidence, and that confidence would, in turn, drive further growth. He spoke often of the magic of the marketplace, a phrase that captured his deep faith in the power of free enterprise to solve problems and improve lives. In the early years, the results were quite painful. The country fell into a deep recession in 1982, and unemployment rose sharply. Critics declared that Reaganomics had failed, but then things began to turn around. By 1983, the economy was growing again, and this time it was growing without the high inflation of the previous decade. The misery index, a simple sum of the inflation and unemployment rates, began to fall. Inflation rates, unemployment rates. In foreign policy, Ronald Reagan's approach was as clear and direct as his economic plan. He saw the Cold War not as a permanent condition to be managed, but as a moral, ideological struggle that could be won. He abandoned the prevailing policy of détente. Instead, he adopted a posture of peace through strength. He believed that a powerful American military was the surest guarantee of national security and the most effective tool for challenging Soviet influence. This marked a profound shift in how America viewed its primary adversary. One of Reagan's most famous and controversial moves was his rhetoric. He did not mince words. In a 1983 speech, he famously called the Soviet Union an evil empire. This was shocking to many at the time. Diplomats worried that such language was too confrontational. Allies worried it could lead to dangerous escalation. But for Reagan, it was a matter of moral clarity. He wanted to draw a sharp line between the totalitarian system of the USSR and the free, democratic West. He believed it was important to speak the truth about the nature of the Soviet regime, to strengthen the resolve of the free world, to give hope to those living under communist rule. This firm language was backed by a massive military buildup. The Reagan administration initiated the largest peacetime defense spending increase in American history. Funds were poured into modernizing the armed forces, new aircraft carriers, bombers, advanced missile systems. The most ambitious of these projects was the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. Nicknamed Star Wars by its critics, it was a proposal to build a space-based shield that could intercept and destroy incoming nuclear missiles. While its technical feasibility was widely debated, SDI sent a powerful message to Moscow. The United States was prepared to use its technological advantages. Beyond policies and strategies, Ronald Reagan sought to revive a particular set of American values. He was a master storyteller, and the story he told most often was about America itself. He frequently invoked the image of a shining city upon a hill, a phrase borrowed from the early Puritan governor John Winthrop. For Reagan, this was not just a metaphor for greatness, but a vision of a nation defined by its commitment to freedom, faith, individual responsibility. He believed that America had a special mission to be an example to the world, a beacon of hope for all who yearned for liberty. This vision was rooted in a deep respect for traditional values. Reagan championed the importance of family, while the 1980s saw a return of economic growth and national confidence. Reagan's policies also came with a significant and lasting cost. The combination of major tax cuts and large increases in military spending created a serious imbalance in the nation's finances. Government revenue fell just as spending was rising. The result was a dramatic increase in the annual budget deficit, which is the shortfall between what the government spends and what it collects in taxes. Year after year, these deficits added up, causing the total national debt to swell to unprecedented levels. During Reagan's 2 terms, the national debt nearly tripled. This explosion of debt was a major point of criticism, and it came from both sides of the political spectrum. Many conservatives, who traditionally preached fiscal responsibility, were alarmed by the massive deficits. They argued that the government was living far beyond its means and passing on an enormous financial burden to future generations. Liberals, on the other hand, pointed to the deficits as evidence of flawed priorities. They argued that while the administration was spending lavishly on defense, it was cutting programs that supported the poor, the elderly, and the environment. This debate over spending and debt became a central feature of American politics for years to come. The economic comeback also had an uneven social impact. While many Americans prospered during the 1980s, the benefits were not shared equally. The gap between the wealthiest Americans and the rest of the population began to widen significantly. Critics argued that Reagan's policies, particularly the tax cuts that favored corporations and high-income earners, exacerbated this trend toward greater income inequality. They also pointed to the struggles of manufacturing workers who lost their jobs as the economy shifted, and to the growing problems of homelessness in major cities. These were the difficult realities that existed alongside the story of prosperity. These criticisms form an essential part of Reagan's legacy. They serve as a reminder that the national comeback he presided over was not a simple or universal success story. The rising deficits and the growing questions about social equity were real and serious consequences of his administration's choices. While his supporters focused on the renewed growth and optimism, his detractors highlighted the long-term costs and the people who were left behind. A fair assessment of his presidency must acknowledge these difficult truths as real and significant stains on an otherwise confident era. You know, the prosperity of the 1980s was built in part on borrowed money and had unequal effects. Section 6. The stain of scandal, Iran-Contra. In the midst of the successes and optimism of his second term, Ronald Reagan's presidency was rocked by a major scandal. It became known as the Iran-Contra affair, a complex and secretive story of arms deals, covert operations. The affair had two main parts. The first involved the secret sale of weapons to Iran. Iran was officially designated a state sponsor of terrorism. The United States had a public policy of not negotiating with terrorists and not selling arms to the Iranian regime. The secret hope was to secure the release of American hostages held in Lebanon by pro-Iranian groups. The second and more illegal part involved what happened to the money. A portion of the profits was secretly diverted to fund anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua known as the Contras. This violated the Boland Amendment, which prohibited U.S. military aid to the Contras. Officials in Reagan's administration, including Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Section 7. The Cold War's twilight. As the 1980s drew to a close, the world began to witness a truly historic transformation. The rigid, icy division of the Cold War, which had defined global politics for over 4 decades, started to thaw. A new leader had emerged in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. He recognized that his country was facing a profound crisis, with a stagnant economy and a deeply cynical population. To save the Soviet system, he introduced 2 radical new policies: glasnost, perestroika. These reforms unleashed forces that he could not ultimately control. Ronald Reagan, the fierce anti-communist, played a surprisingly crucial role in this final chapter of the Cold War. After years of confrontation, he shifted his approach in his second term. He saw in Gorbachev a leader he could work with. The two men developed a remarkable personal relationship, holding a series of high-stakes summit meetings in Geneva, Reykjavik, Washington, Moscow. Section 8. The Comeback's Complex Canvas. When Ronald Reagan left office in January 1989, he departed as a highly popular president. He had achieved the comeback he had promised. For many Americans, the country felt stronger, prouder, more prosperous than it had a decade earlier. The economy, once plagued by inflation stagnation, was in the midst of a long expansion. Unemployment had fallen significantly from its peak in the early 1980s. The stock market had soared. A spirit of entrepreneurial energy. Section 9. A legacy of renewal and debate. Today, more than 3 decades after he left the White House, Ronald Reagan remains a towering and polarizing figure in American history. His presidency is not just a chapter in a textbook, it is a touchstone for modern political debate. For many, he is the very symbol of the American comeback. They remember his unwavering optimism. They remember his plain-spoken clarity. They remember his deep-seated belief in individual freedom. They see his tenure as a golden age of economic growth and national strength, a time when America rediscovered its confidence and led the world toward a more peaceful future. His name is invoked by those who advocate for lower taxes, less government, a strong national defense. For others, his legacy is far more troubling. They see his era as the beginning of rising inequality, where the benefits of growth flowed primarily to the wealthy.